A lot of people may have heard of the film Planet of the Humans. This is a Michael Moore film. He is the executive producer. He is not the director. He did not actually film this. And as far as I know, he actually had very little involvement with the actual production, but it's something that he has gone ahead and decided to produce and promote. And so it's kind of funny to me. This particular film has caused a really interesting reaction with people. And it's kind of funny. Almost, you kind of think that because this is supposed to be, clearly like a pro environmentalist kind of film, and yet many of the most extreme environmentalists are extremely upset with this film. And at the same time, some of your very hard right people are somewhat enamored with the film. And so I'm going to start out here with a little article from. I get these ads to go away. There we go. Give me 1 second here. I hate these pop-ups. All right, so we've got this article from USA Today, and it says, Michael Moore teases shocking new documentary. It says coronavirus is a warning from Mother Nature. So during an appearance on MSNBC Sunday, the filmmaker, who's now 66, shared how the coronavirus pandemic is related to the themes of Planet of the Humans, which examines climate change and the green energy movement. It says, quote, "We are in dangerous shape here. This pandemic should act as a warning from Mother Nature that our behavior is not appreciated," he said. "And the fact that we have treated the species on this planet, species that oftentimes give us these viruses, it's a failure of us, all of us who call ourselves environmentalists." And it says Moore acted as the executive producer, and the team included his director, Jeff Gibbs, who spent almost a decade researching and documenting the topic. And I have to be honest with you, I know very little about Jeff Gibbs, other than what he talks about in the documentary itself. So let's talk about this film, Planet of the Humans. I know, Pete, you have not seen this film, correct?
I've just seen an ad for it. I wasn't even sure what it was. I thought it was maybe like a satire or something.
Well, it's an interesting film. Michael Moore himself, of course, always involves satire in his films. But again, I don't know exactly how much involvement he really had. I feel like he kind of came in at the end and said, "Hey, I'll promote this film for you. This is my buddy and I like it, and let's do that." In fact, I've heard people that were involved in this documentary were involved in Michael Moore's previous documentaries and were on camera even talking about this film, which apparently took years and years and years to finish. And it's a very interesting film. And it starts out in a way that I think a lot of people, quite frankly, on both sides of the issue would understand. And you would actually be like, okay, I get that. That makes a lot of sense. Because the way he starts out is something that I say to my own children all the time when we're talking about green energy and electric cars and things like that. One of the first things I always say when we talk about an electric car is, the electric car is not going to help you very much if it's powered, if you're powering it with a coal plant. You're recharging it because the grid is on a coal plant. And a lot of people, I think, get that concept, and yet they don't. And that's kind of one of the places that this film starts out in. And I think a lot of reasonable people would be like, well, that makes sense. And that's part of the story that's not really being told as much as it probably should be. Because a lot of people just assume, hey, if you have an electric car, it's quote unquote more green, and it causes less carbon emissions and all these other things that people that care about the environment think is important. But the fact of the matter is, as far as its actual carbon footprint, you're not really saving anything. So it comes down to, so what's the alternative? How else can we power the grid, right? And so, of course, we've heard these discussions before, all over the place from both sides about where you get that energy. So the first place he goes to is the quote unquote cleanest alternative, which is he goes to solar power and wind. I mean, everybody says that's just the cleanest thing in the world, right? There's no downside to solar power and wind, except there is, because you have to build the solar panels and you have to build the wind turbines. And people forget this. They forget about the energy that is expended to do this, and they forget about the materials that are used to do this. One of the things that they mentioned in the documentary, which I found interesting, was that a great deal of solar panels are not made with sand, which of course we think of sand as absolutely the most renewable, renewable material on the planet because it's so excessive, it's everywhere. But they say that a lot of these solar panels are actually made with quartz, very fine quartz that has to be mined and torn from the earth. And of course, this is something that you would think most environmentalists would be very upset about. And yet it's something that they are indirectly supporting because they want these highly efficient solar panels, which you need highly efficient solar panels to actually do any good so you can power that electric, so you can actually charge an electric car. But the problem becomes you can't charge that electric car with a solar powered grid at night. And that's when you're supposed to be charging the car, right? Is when you're not going to work. You charge it overnight. Well, guess what? Your solar panels don't work at night. So the issue becomes, well, maybe we could use wind, right? That's kind of the idea. We have a cloudy day. We hope that there's some wind picking up, and we can use the wind turbines to go ahead and do that. Well, unfortunately, sometimes the wind's not there either. So what do they do? What do they do? Well, in a lot of cases, they go to coal or they go to natural gas. And it's pretty interesting to see the amount of, they don't spend a lot of time on natural gas, although they clearly don't like it. What they actually end up spending a lot of time on is one of the other alternatives, which is biomass fueling, doing things like wood chips and things like that, which quite honestly, I think that absolutely does have a place in our energy grid and energy scenario. Having it be sort of the primary way of power in the economy, I kind of actually agree with the filmmaker, would be disastrous because you're talking about massive deforestation that would be needed to provide enough wood chips in order to actually replace coal. Because quite frankly, coal is extremely efficient in terms of the amount of it to the amount of energy you get, the amount you pull out and the amount of energy you get from it. And these other forms of energy, they're really lacking in that regard because there's a lot that you have to do. There's a lot of rare earth minerals and things like that are involved in the building of these things, and any electronics. And these things have to be, they're only found in certain places. That they're called rare earth minerals for a reason, because they're very difficult to find and they're difficult to mine. And the mining operations, of course, are something that you would think most environmentalists would be absolutely appalled. They'd be appalled by it. But again, they're indirectly supporting this. So it's an interesting documentary, and I find the reaction to it very interesting because, again, you have these people. I've seen articles of people that I would say are more or less on the extreme right, sort of almost praising this movie. And I think it's only based on a few scenes, like what I'm kind of talking about. And then you have people that are directly. I saw a post from someone from the Green Party talking about what a misleading and terrible film this is, and how Michael Moore has basically betrayed all of the environmentalists and the environmental movement, and he's a disgrace, and they've completely turned on him, which is really interesting to see how polarizing it is. Now, when you see something that polarizing, my take is, well, maybe there is something here. I'm not going to sit here and endorse the entire film and say that I agree with him, especially because he's very against biomass. In fact, that's probably what he goes up against the most, even with all the stuff that he talks about solar and even quote unquote passive solar, which he shows is a big scam, because they still have to use fossil fuels in order to get the generators going and all that kind of stuff. It's really kind of interesting when they break down some of these things. But in terms of actual alternative energy sources, he doesn't really offer a solution. In fact, going back to the beginning of this, when I started talking about this article and the quotes from Michael Moore, you really get the impression that his solution is, we just need to kill off some people. And he doesn't say that in the film, but you certainly get that impression. You get that impression from the article I just read. where Michael Moore is saying that basically COVID-19 is Mother Nature's way of putting us in check, to paraphrase. But I understand the meaning. They don't say that outright in this film, but clearly that's part of the message is that there are just too many people on the planet and the population is not sustainable. And again, they don't offer a solution. They just say that that's basically the situation, and we have to deal with it. There's this interesting scene in the film where the filmmaker, the director, talks about accepting our mortality, and the fact that accepting our mortality is essential to actually making some sort of impact on climate change and all that kind of stuff. And I can read between the lines, and I can understand where they're going with that. And there are other cultural institutions and TV shows that are trying to give the same narrative that we need to accept our mortality. And that means that we need to be more accepting of death, right? That's the bottom line. Um, it's kind of a strange thing that, and I feel like almost there's no coincidence that they decided to release this on YouTube. Yes, it was for Earth Day. Originally, they said it was for Earth Day. But this film, I think, came out in June of last year, I want to say, something like that. It's actually been out for a while. I suppose it's been like on the film festival circuit and things like that. They only decided to release it on YouTube on Earth Day, and it's still out now, as far as I know. And I can't help but think that there's no coincidence that they decided, you know what, with this corona going on, maybe we can get our meaning out there a little bit better. We can kind of imply the things that we want to imply a little bit more that we're not willing to outright just state and say. But the other thing that's really interesting about this is that it's a huge indictment on the entire like environmental, I guess, corporate, I would say, movement. The Sierra Club is hit really hard in this film. So it's really kind of in a lot of ways all over the place. And it really is saying that the Green New Deal is a bunch of crap, that the Green New Deal is just not going to work and it's actually going to make things worse. And again, you're kind of left of, well, what's the solution? And I feel like their solution, I mean, look at the name. It's Planet of the Humans. And that's a takeoff of Planet of the Apes, obviously. They even use a logo that's very similar to the Planet of the Apes film, the classic Planet of the Apes film. And they present at the beginning of the film, can a planet endure if one species becomes dominant? And that's the kind of a central question that they put out there. And of course, the answer is no. And the question becomes, well, where does that leave you? Where does that leave you if that's your assumption that no, we cannot allow one species to be dominant? So it's an interesting film, and like I said, it's got some elements in there that I think most people, even on separate sides, quote unquote, of the issue, I think would understand and agree with. But it comes to some very, very bizarre conclusions, and it's kind of making everybody angry in one way or another.
Well, that can't be all bad. I would say when you have a group like the Sierra Club or any of these environmentalist groups, yes, they're interested in the environment, but they're also interested in consistency. They're also interested in their brand. And so as facts come out and previous positions that they took are contradicted or the evidence no longer supports what they used to believe in, they're not going to turn on a dime and say, well, this technology is good or this technology is bad. We should do this. And when we said before we should do that, because they don't want to look foolish and they have to be credible in front of their donors. And they may have other interests besides purely the environment. If we're being honest, they're partisan. And so going after things that are supported by Republicans is just kind of part of their MO. Not because it's good for the environment, but things like nuclear energy, which we know is good on balance for the environment. Well, Republicans support that, so we can't possibly support that. And I think as far as clean energy goes, right now with oil as cheap as it is, and it was inexpensive before, but as cheap as it is right now, you're not going to see much investment over the next few years into green energy. It's just not going to happen because the incentive isn't there. The next time the price of oil skyrockets, people will start investing again in solar, start investing again in biomass and all these other technologies. But for right now, green energy is dead for the time being. That's just the way it is.
Well, the funny thing is, at least the position that they take in the film is that's you're probably better off that way. So it's just kind of a funny thing because that they're one of their main positions in this film is that a lot of these supposed green energies, because of all the hidden costs, it would just be easier to just use more traditional coal, a coal generator or something like that. That would actually have less of a carbon impact. I'm sorry, less of a carbon impact than what they're doing now, because it's very much sort of a hodgepodge hybrid system, if you will, kind of like a hybrid car, right? Hybrid car has an elaborate battery, but it also has an engine to keep the battery going to recharge it. Um, that's kind of what they're talking about. It's very much the same principle that a lot of these supposedly, even solar farms and a lot of these other places, the wind turbine things, they have to be supplemented by something because again, they've got those physical limitations of no sun, no power, no wind, no power. You know, so that's not to say that's universal. By the way, I am aware that there are some means out there to try to store that energy better. And I'm not talking about batteries because batteries have their own inherent problems as far as sustainability and as far as what do you do with it when the battery is no more and no longer works because these batteries don't last forever. But
Right.
there are other creative ways to deal with this problem. It's just that for the most part, that's not what they do. That's not
Right.
the
You
way
have
it
to mine the
works.
metals for the metal that's inside of the battery. And you think, okay, well, that's a one-time cost in terms of carbon footprint, but it's a non-trivial cost. And so even over the life of your car, if you have a car with a li-ion battery, it's an electric car, the carbon footprint of mining that of those mining those minerals may be greater than the exhaust you will let out of your car.
Exactly. Exactly.
And here's another thing that I don't think that the green energy movement realizes, and maybe they are aware of this, but there are a number of research groups and have been for a long time who are looking into how can we get bacteria to produce fuel. And that fuel will essentially be something like petroleum, something like the gasoline in your car. Maybe it'll be more like the green oil, the biofuel that you get that is made from ethanol from corn or whatever, right? But when that happens, I don't see any way that wind and solar and all these other types of energy long term are going to be able to compete. Once we can scale up the production of bacteria fueled oil production, and we're turning our plastic waste back into petroleum, I think it's game over for the green energy movement.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm not very familiar with that technology, but that's definitely interesting.
Yeah, they have been able to get it to produce like oils for food, so it's producing food products right now, but that's about it. But it's coming. It may be 20 years, maybe 30 or 50, but it's coming.